The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. This is Jennifer Schaus coming to you live from Washington, D.C. This is our 12:30 webinar in our Webinar Wednesday series. We do host a webinar every Wednesday at 12 o'clock, and we've added a 12:30 slot to cover additional topics. Our presenters are industry experts, and that ranges from accountants, attorneys, other advisors, and industry experts that are sharing their knowledge about this sector. All of the webinars are complimentary. They are listed, the full schedule is listed on our website under the webinar section, and then the recordings are under the webinar section. It's entitled Archived Webinars. You can also find those on our YouTube channel. And if you do have questions today for Marcia Lindquist, who is our speaker, her contact information will be on the last slide. Marcia is a returning speaker for us, and her main area of expertise is pricing, and she does a great job with that. So we'll get to her in one moment. A quick blurb about us. We are based in downtown Washington, D.C. and provide professional services for government contractors, both companies that are selling products and services. Our professional services range from market analysis reports, proposal writing, the contract vehicles such as GSA schedules, and then for companies that are already doing business with the government, kind of that post-award contract administration, reporting, and compliance. We do host networking events throughout the year, as well as conferences and seminars. You can find those on our website under the events section. And let's get into today's presentation, delivered by none other than the lovely and talented Marcia Lindquist. You can read about her impressive background here. She's got some impressive certifications with NCMA and APMP, and she's been a great partner to us. So price matters, and I'm going to hand this over to Marcia. And Marcia, the floor is all yours, and thanks for sharing your time with us today and your knowledge. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to take a second here and say, why does price matter? People ask me that all the time. Of course, we're faced with price being sometimes the deciding factor in whether you win an opportunity or not. A lot of times it's simply a matter of price, and so price has a lot of bearing on whether you win a contract or not. People often say to me, well, we focus so much on the technical proposal, we got to write this really great proposal, and I always say, if the price isn't right, you're still not going to win. So price does matter. And today, we're going to dive into just a little bit of the role that price has in making something a winning price for you. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll talk about why do you even need a pricing strategy? What is that, Marcia? And I want to talk about it just a wee bit. It's not just a matter of throwing the numbers together, putting a profit on it, although that's a factor, certainly, and then calling it good. So pricing strategy, in my opinion, are the deliberate actions that you take, the decisions that you make, in order to drive your ultimate price to a winning price. Now, that also says you got to have an idea of what that winning price range ought to be. It's not just a number, it's a combination of the number and also the various things that you offer your customers. And a very, very important piece of that is that the value proposition that you offer your customer has an important bearing on the price. So if you offer a whole bunch of features and added value that the customer doesn't care about, it'll pump up the price, and then ultimately it may not be something that your customer cares about. So it's not just a cost plus a fee number, as I talked about before. You need to assess risk in whether your price incorporates the various elements of risk that you have in responding to this particular opportunity. It means that you also have to do a risk register and determine what your risks are and what you're going to do to mitigate it, and also what you're going to do to incorporate that into your pricing strategy, because pricing strategy incorporates risk in it as well. We have to know whether you're conservative, aggressive, and the various different risks that you face. So it is, pricing strategy is cost plus what are your various strategies in order to get to the winning price. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is taking into consideration the various elements of cost, but also toggling those things that you have control over, most notably the value that you add. So you can impact your costs certainly by the various things that you do relative to the various cost elements, but you can impact the price even more with the value that you add, the risks that you take, and incorporate that into your price. The biggest impact that you have on your pricing strategy, back to why you need a pricing strategy, is the methods and decisions that you make in order to influence the value that you add to this particular customer's offering, and whether the customer really cares about that value or not. Again, like I said a few minutes ago, if you add a bunch of dollars to added value that you offer your customer and they don't care, then you've added a bunch of value that frankly isn't going to help you win. Next slide, if we could, please. Thank you. All right, so let's talk about a few easy pricing strategy options that you've got. Go on to the next slide. Excuse me. And so the first thing that we talk about is your staffing creativity, what you can do to impact your staffing, your staff's ability to respond to this particular requirement. So your staffing mix, make sure it always meets the requirements and does not exceed the requirements. You always have to ask yourself this question: can you do with less wisely? And does the customer care about any more that you're adding? If someone is priced at, a 20-year experience factor and the customer wants 8 years, are they willing to pay those extra dollars in order to get that 20-year person, and does it matter? So you want to show how your staffing solution meets the PWS. You want to make sure that you give the client your strategy for satisfying that staffing requirement. The biggest concern is that if you give so many junior people into the program, you don't meet the performance work statement, PWS, that's what performance work statement stands for, then ultimately the customer may scratch their head and say, wait a minute, I'm not sure they can actually perform, and they may add more dollars to your bid for you in order to cover that. Make sure that your key personnel are the best personnel you can afford, but also only meet the requirements. Don't give them more than what they are asking for. Okay, next slide. So what are your escalation considerations? People say, well, we're just going to pick a number. It's going to be 2% or 3% or whatever it happens to be. But there's more to escalation than just picking a number. So the important part is to get some bona fide documentation on escalation. Not only can you pay for it with McGraw-Hill that can give you escalation projections for the future, but you also may take a look at historical trends. Keep in mind, you don't want to pick a number just out of the air. You want to be able to justify it, because typically in any proposal response, you have to justify what you did in what is typically known as a pricing methodology. If you don't justify your escalation and where it came from, it may, for example, be based on your own company history, or it may be based upon Department of Labor historical trends. If you don't give the evaluator that documentation, they again may change your numbers upwards or downwards, depending upon how credible that number has been derived. So again, take a look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. professional admin categories are where I like to go build a trend, see what the analysis will tell you about escalation. You may vary it by contract year. If you're seeing that the trend is different in the last couple of years, no, by the way, it is changing again. We're seeing it go upwards a little bit, but keep in mind you also have to be very cognizant of what your competitors are doing. You also may vary it by labor category if you're building services type arrangements. You may take a look at some categories that may be in high demand or low demand and vary your escalation accordingly. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the value adds and the minimum requirements. And I alluded to this at the very beginning of our discussion. If you only bid the minimum requirements, you're probably bidding a low price technically acceptable bid, LPTA, some people refer to it as. If that's the case, then you really need to only bid the minimum that's required and nothing more. Make sure that, that you resist the strong urge to add more value to the bid. Do you really need it? Ask yourself, am I adding something that the client really cares about? If the answer is no, take it out, okay? Make sure you itemize your value adds where you can do that. Make sure you keep track of what those costs are relative to those value adds, and make sure you put it in a graphic in the upfront piece of your proposal, okay? Make sure you add value adds to your pricing executive summary, introduction, wherever it is that you want to point those out. Give an opportunity to the reader to hear that, see that up front. Next slide. Let's talk about kind of my fourth piece here, which is you can come up with new indirect pools. A lot of times people will say, well, I've got fringe, I've got overhead, I've got G&A, and that's all I've got. Well, that's not always the case. A lot of people have gone to creating new indirect pools. Sometimes they're new overheads when they are building a new bid. If it's a new piece of business or a new area, consider that as well. Hang on one sec. Excuse me. A lot of people will impact their G&A with the impact of adding a whole bunch of new business to their business base. Some contractors may add a subcontract handling pool or a material handling pool. Those are all considerations when the bid that you're going after is materially different than the rest of your existing business. But it does need to be different than the rest of your existing business. Next slide. And so our last item of consideration today, and there are many more in the toolbox, by the way, they're not just these 5, is profit. A lot of people will toggle with profit in order to change their ultimate bid, and it is one consideration. It's not the only consideration. So you often say, well, what should I bid, Marcia, on profit? Part of it depends on the type of contract that you're going after. Part of it depends upon your competition, and some of it depends on your own management, your own company desires for profit margins. But mostly, you need to take a look at what are your risks, what are your rewards, and where do you have the potential for potentially more business or less business. Sometimes I recommend to people, while they're not required to do weighted guidelines, which is a Department of Defense way to arrive at your profit margin that you bid. It is a lot of subjectivity in there, but it may give you a framework, I tell people. It's a very, very good way to analyze what your adequate profit range ought to be. Make sure that when you take a look at it, you look at it analytically as well as potentially the emotional factors that tend to come into play, and make sure it fits your opportunity that you're going after. make sure it fits your competition, make sure it fits your risk register and your own business model as well. Make it more of an unemotional decision than, well, that's what our management wants. Make sure you cover your unallowable costs, because you have to know what percentage your unallowables cost you in doing business, because you need your profit margin to, at a very minimum, cover that, because you don't want to take business that you ultimately will be losing money on. And you may vary it year by year. You may choose to vary it by the type of effort that you've got. In the DoD environment, you would not put profit on other direct costs. And also make sure it is consistent throughout your team. Make sure you discuss that with your team ahead of time. Don't let that be something that your teammates hold you up hostage for at the very end. And that's all I have today to talk about why price matters. And so here is my wonderful phone number, email. I'm open to hearing from you all. Please contact me if you've got questions. Thank you all very much for attending today.
Thank you, Marcia. Great information as always, our pricing and numbers guru. Today's session has been recorded, and we hope to have both the 12 o'clock session and this 12:30 p.m. session recording up on our website by tomorrow, and it'll also be on the YouTube channel. Next week, which is the 18th, Wednesday the 18th at 12 o'clock, we are covering marketing to the government and increasing your federal sales. And then at 12:30, we're going to talk about data privacy, opting in, and GDPR, how these data privacy laws are affecting government contractors. The full schedule of all of our webinars can be found on our website. And again, thanks everybody for attending. Thanks, Marcia, for a fantastic presentation. And we'll see everybody next time. Thank you.
Thank you.